The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Jnana Yoga, Chapter 6, The Absolute and Manifestation, Part 1. The one question that is most difficult to grasp in understanding the Advaita philosophy, and the one question that will be asked again and again, and that will always remain, is how has the infinite, the absolute, become the finite? I will take up this question, and in order to illustrate it, I will use a figure. I will now use a figure. Here is the absolute A, and this is the universe B. The absolute become the universe. By this, not only meant the material world, but the mental world, the spiritual world, heavens and earths, and in fact everything that exists. Mind is the name of a change, the body the name of another change, and so on. And all these changes compose our universe. This absolute A has become the universe B by coming through time, space and causation. This is the central idea of Advaita. Time, space and causation are like the glass through which the absolute is seen. And when it is seen on the lower side, it appears as the universe. Now we at once gather from this that is the absolute, there is neither time, space nor causation. The idea of time cannot be there, seeing that there is no mind, no thought. The idea of space cannot be there, seeing that there is no external change. What you call motion and causation cannot exist when there is only one. We have to understand this and impress it on our minds, that what we call causation begins after, and if we may be permitted to say so, the degeneration of the absolute into the phenomenal and not before, that our will, our desire and all these things always come after that. I think Schopenhauer's philosophy makes a mistake in its interpretation of the Vedanta, for it seeks to make the will everything. Schopenhauer makes the will stand in the place of the absolute. But the absolute cannot be presented as will, for will is something changeable and phenomenal, and over the line, drawn above time, space and causation. There is no change, no motion, it is only below the line that external motion and internal motion, called thought, begin. There can be no will on the other side, and will therefore cannot be the cause of this universe. Coming nearer, we see in our own bodies that will it not be the cause of every movement. I move this chair. My will is the cause of this movement. And this will become manifested as the muscular motion at the other end. But the same power that moves the chair is moving the heart, the lungs and so on, but not through will. Given that the power is the same, it only becomes will when it rises to the plane of consciousness. And to call it will before it has risen to this plane is a misnomer. This makes a good deal of confusion in Schopenhauer's philosophy. A stone falls, and we ask why. This question is possible only on the supposition that nothing happens without a cause. I request you to make this very clear in your mind, for whenever we ask ourselves why anything happens, we are taking for granted that everything that happens must have a why. That is to say, it must have been preceded by something else which acted as a cause. This precedence and succession are what we call the law of causation. It means that everything in the universe is by turn a cause and an effect. It is the cause of certain things which come after it, and it itself is the effect of something else which has preceded it. This is called the law of causation and is a necessary condition of all our thinking. We believe that every particle in the universe, whatever it be, is in relation to every other particle. There has been much discussion as to how this idea arose. In Europe, there have been intuitive philosophers who believed that it was a constitutional in humanity. Others have believed that it came from experience. But the question has never been settled. We shall see later on what the Vedanta has to say about it. But first, we have to understand that this very asking of the question why presupposes that everything round us has been preceded by certain things and will be succeeded by certain other things. The other belief involved in this question is that nothing in the universe is independent and that everything is acted upon by something outside itself. Interdependence is the law of the whole universe. In asking what has caused the absolute, what an error are we making? To ask this question, we have to suppose that the absolute is also bound by something that is dependent on something, and in making this supposition, we drag the absolute down to the level of the universe. For in the absolute there is neither time, space nor causation. It is all one. That which exists by itself alone cannot have any cause. That which is free cannot have any cause, or else it would not be free but bound. That which has become relativity cannot be free. Thus we see the very question why the infinite has become the finite is an impossible one, for it is self-contradictory. Coming from the subtitles, subtleties, to the logic of our common plane, to common sense, we can see this from another side. When we seek to know how the absolute became the relative, supposing we knew the answer, would the absolute remain the absolute? It would have become relative. What is meant by knowledge in our common sense idea? It is only something that has become limited by our mind, that we know, and when it is beyond our mind, it is not knowledge. Now if the absolute becomes limited by the mind, it is no more an absolute, it has become finite. Everything limited by the mind becomes finite. Therefore, to know the absolute is again a contradiction in terms. That is why this question has never been answered, because if it were answered, there would be no more be an absolute. A God known is no more God. He has become finite like one of us. He cannot be known. He is always the unknowable one. But what Advaita says is that God is more than knowable. This is a great fact to learn. You must not go home with the idea that knowledge is unknowable in the sense in what agnostics put it. For instance, here is a chair, it is known to us. But what is beyond ether, or whether people exist, there or not, is possibly unknowable. But God is neither known nor unknowable in this sense. He is something still higher than known. That is what is meant by God being unknown and unknowable. The expression is not used in the sense in which it may be said that some questions are unknown and unknowable. God is more than known. This chair is known. But God is intensely more than that, because in and through Him we have to know this chair, We have to know Him, know in and through Him. He is the essence of our own self. He is the essence of this ego. This I and we cannot know anything except in and through that I. Therefore, you have to know everything in and through Brahman. To know the chair, you have to know it in and through God. Thus, God is infinitely nearer to us than the chair, and yet He is infinitely higher. Neither known nor unknown, but something infinitely higher than either. He is yourself. Who would live a second? Who would breathe a second in this universe if that Blessed One were not filling it? Because in and through Him we breathe. In and through Him we exist. Not the He is standing somewhere and making our blood circulate. What is meant is that He is the essence of all this, the soul of my soul. You cannot by any possibility say you know Him. It would be degrading Him. You cannot get out of yourself. You cannot know Him. Knowledge is objectification. For instance, in memory you are objectifying many things, projecting them out of yourself. All memory, all the things which I have seen and which I know are in my mind. The pictures, the impressions of all these things are in my mind. And when I would try to think of them, to know them, the first act of knowledge would be to project them outside. This cannot be done with God, because He is the essence of our souls. We cannot project Him outside ourselves. Here is one of the profoundest passages in the Vedanta. He that is the essence of your soul, He is the truth. He is the self. Thou art that. O Shweta Ketu. This is what is meant by Thou art God. You cannot describe Him by any other language. All attempts of language, calling Him father or brother or our dearest friend, are attempts to objectify God, which cannot be done. He is the eternal subject of everything. I am the subject of this chair. I see the chair. So God is the eternal subject of my soul. How can you objectify Him, the essence of your souls, the reality of everything? Thus I would repeat to you once more, God is neither knowable nor unknowable, but something infinitely higher than either. He is one with us, and that which is one with us is neither knowable nor unknowable, as your own self. You cannot know your own self. You can move it out and make it an object to look at, because you are that and you cannot separate yourself from it. Neither is it unknowable, for what is better than known yourself? It is really the center of our knowledge. In exactly the same sense, God is neither unknowable nor known, but infinitely higher than both, for He is our real self. First we see then that the question, what caused the Absolute, is a contradiction in terms. And secondly, if we find that the idea of God in the Advaita is the oneness, and therefore we cannot objectify Him, for we are always living and moving in Him, whether we know it or not. Whatever He does, whatever we do, is always through Him. Now the question is, what are time, space and causation? Advaita means non-duality. There are no two but one. Yet we see that there is a proposition that the Absolute is manifesting itself as many through the veil of time, space and causation. Therefore it seems that here are two, the Absolute and Maya, the sum total of the time, space and causation. It seems apparently very convincing that there are two, To this, Advaitist replies that it cannot be called two. We must have two absolute independent existences which cannot be caused. In the first place, time, space and causation cannot be said to be independent existences. Time is entirely a dependent existence. It changes with every change of our mind. Sometimes in dream one imagines that one has lived several years. At other times several months were passed as 1 second. So time is entirely dependent on our state of mind. Secondly, the idea of time vanishes altogether sometimes. So with space. We cannot know what space is, yet it is there, indefinable, and cannot exist separate from anything else. So is causation. The one peculiar attribute we find in time-space causation is that they cannot exist separate from other things. Try to think of space without color or limits or the connection with things around, just abstract space. You cannot. You have to think of it as the space between two limits or between three objects. It has to be connected with some object to have any existence. So it is with time. You cannot have any idea of abstract time, but you have to take two events, one preceding and the other succeeding, and join the two events by the idea of succession. Time depends on these two events, just as space has to be related to outside objects. And the idea of causation is inseparable from time and space. This is a peculiar thing about them, that they have no independent existence. They have not even the existence which the chair or the ball has. They are as shadows around everything which you cannot catch. They have no real existence, yet they are not non-existent, seeing that through them all things are manifesting in this universe. Thus we see first that the combination of time, space and causation has neither existence nor non-existence. Sometimes it vanishes. To give an illustration, there is a wave on the ocean. The wave is the same as the ocean certainly, and yet we know that it is a wave, and as such different from the ocean. What makes this difference? The name and the form, that is the idea in the mind and the form. Now can we think of a wave form as something separate from the ocean? Certainly not. It is always associated with the ocean idea. If the wave subsides, the form vanishes in a moment, and yet the form was not a delusion. So long as the wave existed in the form was there, and you were bound to see the form. This is Maya.